Carl-Johan, I am really happy to have you on the show. Welcome to Genius Leadership Podcast.
Thank you very much. I'm very glad you reached out. Yeah,
I'm
look forward to
excited where
this.
the conversation will guide us because you have so much experience and you also are so open to sharing. And you have very interesting questions as well that you're facing at the moment. So maybe it will be a bit of a life coaching here. We'll see. Maybe I
Let's hope
can
for that. Let's hope for that. Yeah.
maybe I can give you some pieces of advice how for the things that keep your mind busy
Yeah.
nowadays.
Well, I'm sure it's going to be a learning experience, and I look forward to that.
It always is. I love this podcasting journey, and you have your own podcast, so you probably know that from the host perspective as well. So I usually start with the question: Who is a leader, and what is leadership for you?
That's a really big question. I thought about it a little bit before, and I think rather a perspective on leadership. I think a leader is somebody who really works to get other people to grow. I think if you can have that perspective, that's a success factor, and also I think a good leader is one that perhaps can help other people to grow. Different kind of people. I think over the years I found that at least and when I was sort of new at this, I was better at leading some kind of people. In some situations, I was a lot worse at other situations. I think the more you learn, and the wider perspective you can have there, and handle sort of different situations, I think you improve as a leader. And you always find, I think you always find new ones all the time that you sort of fail at, and it's usually combined with failure. You realize, okay, this didn't go well. I have to think in a different way. Of course, you also. Um, so yeah, I think that's. I don't know if that was an answer, but that was a
It
start,
was a
perhaps.
great answer. We talk a lot about getting other people to grow here on the show, and how you, as a leader, is how it is about serving your people and really bringing the best out of them. But I really liked your perspective and twist on that. That it's different kind of people. That
Yeah,
a good leader is really the one who can find the best of different people, and not only be able to lead the people who are same like them, for example.
I think another perspective on that. I think also that which I at least I use to try and help myself is to also have the perspective that you also can learn something from the people you're expected to lead. It's not sort of a one-way relationship; it's a two-way relationship. And if you kind of keep that alive, it makes, I think, it makes your job more exciting because you always get something. And I think especially being a little older now than I was when I started the company, I especially working with young people, you always kind of get inspired by the things they know and learn and do, and sort of I think that makes it more fun, but also that's definitely true all the way. If you can sort of learn both ways, then that's or grow both ways, then that's I think that is a good perspective.
I think it's very important, this perspective on leadership. I said the same about my coaching, that I learn from my clients just as much as they learn from me. It's just different. Like they
Yeah.
help me broaden my perspectives. They help me see different opinions and just really, and they also educate me about their work, for example, or their companies, how they function. So it's about being curious and really being open to learn new things as a leader. And I think that's also something that you mentioned in the first part of your answer, or in the answer, that it's about learning from the mistakes. And I think for that, you need to be reflective and open to learn. So that it sounds to me like those are also important characteristics of a leader for you.
I agree with that. Agree with that. Definitely.
So talking about learnings, you have co-founded ANS in 2004. So now it's almost 2 decades.
Yeah, I just had a meeting before this with Hugo, and I was sort of, how long have we been doing this? And he said, I usually say we've been doing it for 20 years. I said, we haven't been doing it for 20 years. And he said, almost.
Yeah.
Not quite there yet, but I think we're getting there.
So tell us a bit about the learnings. And I thought of separating the conversation up to 2004 till 2020 March, and then
Yeah,
have the COVID, because I know that you've gone through a lot of new learnings and different
yeah.
learnings in the last pandemic year.
I mean, I think I mean, of course, you can always start from the beginning, and um, I think sort of starting a company and being an entrepreneur, I think, of course, there's all the sort of practicalities about learning how to do sort of the ups and downs of organizing a company, and then it seems to me that it's also different stages. I mean, there was one thing to go from sort of 0 to 10 people, and then sort of 10 to 25 people, and then all these steps that people talk about. I do think they exist.
Mm.
It's a little bit different where they are. So. And for us, I mean, now we're sort of, I mean, it's 75, I think now, and sort of looking moving towards 100 if we're lucky, and it's a new kind of situation. So it's always there are different parts of it along the way, and at the moment I'm trying to. I mean, of course, it's been a learning curve now with COVID at distance. How do you lead at distance? But also, I think, how do you lead a bigger company? How do you organize these things? And I mean, during those years, I think also a massive thing was, of course, when we sold one company. I mean, that was a big, of course, a sort of a big learning. I think also the crisis situations that you sort of handled during the years. I mean, we've been through kind of two major economic crises, 2008 and now then COVID, and I think those have also been very good learning experience. They're not always such a great experience, but as with all things, once you go through it, it feels you wouldn't perhaps have wanted to be without them.
Not a positive experience, but valuable learning.
Oh, definitely, yeah, definitely, and yeah, definitely, and I think I mean definitely if we sort of focus on the last year, I definitely think that we're a better company now than we were a year ago, actually.
What made it better? What makes you think so?
Well, I think this is always to a certain point up to others to say, but my experience is that we did build a lot of trust, and the fact that we could as a company survive and react quickly and do things, I mean, quite often tough things, and for us, of course, the tough things were mostly involved actually laying off really trusted and good colleagues. But I think to be able to do that in as much as possible in a way that was with empathy and with feeling and also to create understanding for why you do things, and with all that communication, I think that's, at least I think we did that quite well, and I'm quite proud of the way we did it. And I think that has made everybody who was in that stage, sort of everybody that was there has learned something, and to a certain extent, I think created a bond. It creates sort of a togetherness that we survived and we did it, and we can move forward. I think that does make us stronger, and also, of course, there's some practical learnings. How do you know what you should do's and don'ts, sort of.
Yeah, the practicality is always some pieces, but I want to tap a bit more into the trust. For example, you are very open and you don't have the prestige from what I see in the company. Like when I go to the company webpage, you are there, you're putting yourself out in the spotlight and you're showing how you're developing. For example, you have this whole video about you being trained for preparing for the speech, right, with David.
Oh yeah, that was fun. Yeah, with I forgot his name now, but a really great guy.
David JP.
David JP, yeah, JP Phillips, yeah, great. That was fun. Yeah.
He has a very popular TED talk about their body language and their presentation skills. And you just put yourself out there and show them, like, okay, here's my speech before the training, and then you're being coached by him so that it's also on the video, and then there is the result, right? And you're just really open about how you are developing yourself. And I think this is something that helps building trust with your employees and show, like, hey guys, I'm here. I'm not a guru. I don't know everything. I'm willing to learn from you and from the others. So I think that really helps building this culture.
I think you're right. I think it's really important. I mean, something we talk about a lot is to be able to kind of ask stupid questions. And I'm not saying, sort of rather saying that no questions are stupid, and to be able to ask for help and help each other and reach out. And I think that's really important. I think the only way to, I mean, I spend a lot of time asking other people, how do you create this trust? How do you do things? And the only answers I seem to get is to, you can talk about it, but you also have to try and do it yourself and sort of show weakness in a certain extent. And I think you have to be fair that it's quite easy for me to do because I'm in a sort of you to say you're in a strong position, you've done this for you, kind of, you're head of the company, you own the company. So it's sort of in that sense, it's sort of, I don't think it's a big ask for me to do that, but if I don't do it, who then can do it, if you see what I mean. So I think
I see what you mean, but I would actually oppose to that, because there are a lot of people, enough people who are in the positions like yours, who say I have too much to lose, or who say that they can't show those weaknesses because what will people think, or how will that affect the morale in the company and so on. So what you're talking about now, it's actually reflecting how you think and how you are as a human. Carry-on.
Maybe, but I think it's also perhaps fair to, I think it's also maybe, I mean, I thought about it actually a lot when we, during COVID, when we sort of, I mean, we were in a situation where we all, I mean, there was I talk about that, I think in that speech that we, I mean, really thought this is it. This was over. It was over. And I remember, especially a moment when I think it was a Wednesday when me and Hugo talked and we looked at the numbers and we realized that whatever we do, we're probably going to go bust. And things didn't turn out that way, but it felt like that. And I think for me, I mean, that was a frightening thing, and it was a sort of frightening thing in the sense that you saw all these great people that were going to lose their job. But I think it wasn't as scary as it perhaps was 10 years earlier or other crises when you sort of kind of hadn't proved yourself, or you hadn't sort of, and I think that's to a certain extent that's sort of a silly thing, because you I think all people have this need to sort of show how they succeed to the world, or perhaps to their parents or their fathers or their mothers, and all these things. And even though, so I think it's once you have done something and you could feel proud of that and you can show that, it's perhaps easier to then have sort of other failures perhaps or things
If
that
you're ready to learn and
I think
open
so.
to that. Again,
Yeah,
I think it is really the mindset in a way, and also it comes down to self-esteem. If you don't feel like you're enough, you need to perform, right? And you're depending on the performance.
probably right about that. Yeah.
What I hear from you is that your self-esteem is quite okay. That you don't feel.
I think I've been lucky with that over the years, and yeah, and
What makes you like it? Let's take like tap into that, because that's something I need to help a lot of my clients with, building that up. So
I mean, it's funny when you say self-esteem. I do. I mean, one thing is I think about sort of a weakness I have. I do kind of enjoy getting uh, sort of what's that, appreciation. I sort of enjoy being the nice guy to some. I think that is a weakness, and I kind of work with that and think about. So I have to think about that. Okay, I and I know. So I mean I mean that could be a sign of low esteem in the sense, but I spend a lot of time thinking about that. How can I sort of handle myself and not be too sort of seeking. I think if you sort of seeking appreciation or seeking feedback too much, that's not necessarily a good thing. So how do you create self-esteem? I think. I mean, it's a hard question because it's something you think a lot when you have children. You sort of think, how do you create self-esteem with your children? And I've been quite inspired by one of the podcasts I listen to a lot. Is I think Freakonomics. It's one of those great, you and me as podcasters, we aspire to be Freakonomics, and they have but I think it's one of those one of the guys that do Freakonomics, very sort of thinking person. I think he's a Nobel Prize laureate, and he says he has this idea about how do you raise children and sort of what's important with raising children. I think it's something that all parents struggle with. How do you sort of make them successful in some sense? What do you really want with your children? And his conclusion is the only thing that's really important is to make sure they love you. Well, I mean, sorry, make sure they know that you love them. But I mean, it's not a trivial problem. How do you make sure your children know that you love them? It's not, you can say that you love, you can do all these things, but it's not sort of a, it's not a, so I think that's perhaps the answer. I think if you can sort of feel loved or feel appreciated, and that kind of feels true, then that is kind of a way to create self-esteem or to kind of instill self-esteem on others. And I think perhaps if you look from a leadership perspective, when trying to lead others, I think it is if you can sort of, I think what works is to give encouragement, but also to see. I mean, to not sort of say, "You're a great Anna, you're really good, Anna. I really like you," but be a lot more specific. Sort of say, "Okay, I think this what you did there was really good, and that was good because of this, and I can see these things you do, and I appreciate, and they're good. Continue that, more of that, keep doing that." Um, um, and even I think when things go badly, you sort of say, okay, that wasn't great, but the way you handle this spot, more of that, do more of that. I think that's sort of perhaps a method in a sense, and I think that perhaps also does create self-esteem among others, perhaps.
Yeah, you're tapping on a lot of great points here, Carl-Johan. Like have a 2-year-old now, and I am in that space every day. How do I help her be the best version of herself? How do
Yeah,
I create the environment in which she can thrive and keep developing and keep exploring for till the last day of her life? And talking about the I love you and showing the love, I I have a rule like inside me that I say it to her at least once every day, but usually it comes more. I don't count how many times, but it comes more. But the other rule is when she's misbehaving, when she's tired and cranky and so on, and when we are unhappy with her behavior, I make it an extra point for myself to actually say I love her, I love you to her in those moments.
yeah,
And I include that in a conversation. I say, okay, right now you're doing this and that, and I'm not happy about that.
yeah,
And I
yeah,
love you.
yeah. It's funny. I think it was my mother-in-law that told me once. She said that you always love your children, but you don't always like them.
Yeah,
I think that's
that's
quite
right.
good.
Yeah.
That sort of sums up parenthood to a certain extent. Sometimes it's got to be okay to have a sort of a bit of friction as well.
Yeah. And I think it's important to give the labels. Like I'm saying to her, like, okay, now I'm annoyed because you're doing this and that.
Mm,
So you kind of making that, but then you also show that, okay, no matter what, I'm still loving you.
yeah.
And
And I think it was a great, as I also had a great example. Yeah, when I was when we were new, when we had small children, we had a great sort of very progressive daycare center, and there was all this. It was a good course actually. It was a course about how do you talk to your children, and I can't remember that. It was sort of non-violent communication was the process, and it was good. It's really good, and it was all about I feel this way and all these things. And at the same time, I had a good friend. He had a sort of an older child, and he was practicing on the child was like he said, I feel this makes me feel bad. And the child was like, I feel good when you feel bad. That's sort of what, but that's what sort of teenagers are supposed to do, though. You said so.
yeah,
It's
yeah.
another strange story, but
That's the best about the kids, right? They don't filter themselves. And
yeah,
that's the thing, like then they give you the space, like, okay, and then you
yeah.
can explore together. Okay, what makes you feel good when I feel bad? And
And
then,
I think if you another question about self-esteem, I think is of course which builds self-esteem is all these things. Of course, I mean, being able to do things and work at something and then kind of succeed into a certain extent that hard work and then some I think that's sort of of course something that builds sort of ability to kind of overcome problems and I think we in our company we're definitely a company we work with a lot of young people that I mean I think in a sense our business model is hiring young people and making them succeed in the talent acquisition space and how do you recruit and of course you are going to have failures and you're expected to have failures in the sense that you have bumps and I think you have to really help people handle those bumps because if the bumps become too big, they leave and they don't like it. But you also have to have some bumps because otherwise you don't improve, you don't learn. So it's sort of
they get
I
bored
think
and they
that's
leave anyway.
yeah, it is important and some of those failures can be tough because they sort of I mean sometimes it can be a business situation where you have a customer that's not pleased or do this and all these so you have to sort of you kind of have to talk about that and how do you do it and help people handle those bumps and perhaps I don't know sort of I mean and also of course sometimes people aren't right for the job and then you have to talk about that but it's yeah
There are a lot of things here that we actually discuss on the show. Like one of them is like how do you actually let go of people if they're not the right fit, or when like how do you take out someone from the customer and maybe put someone else. So how do you deal with those situations in that end?
well I think that when people don't fit for the job I think I've actually never somebody might say against me here, but I think I've never actually joined all the times in ants. There's never really been I haven't been in a situation where there's been a conflict where somebody sort of feels that it's always a question. Once you kind of talk about it, it usually I mean you go somewhere. Listen, is this really right for you? And you talk about it, and so almost always you have an understanding, and people yeah you're right. Maybe I'm not right for this job, and I think I've been quite. I was another actually podcast I listened to. It was I think it was Jack Welch that said it, that it was one of those, he was a, classical, very, very famous manager of General Electric. And he said at one point, it's really important to let people know where they stand in a company.
Mm-hmm.
I sort of, where are you in this company, Anna? What do we expect from you, and what do people think of you? I mean, of course, you have to do it in the right way. And and the reason he said that was because he said if you don't do that, I mean, if people aren't sort of on the right track, it gives them a chance to go somewhere else and succeed there. And so it's really important to sort of talk about that and kind of give people a fair idea of where they are. And it's not always easy to do because there's lots of reasons, but I think he has a good point there.
That's for sure. Expectation management is one of the big things that you need to do as a leader. And for that, you need to be aware of yourself, because you can't communicate to the people where they stand or in their organization if you don't understand what's going on in your mind.
Yeah.
And that's the thing, you can be the most brilliant manager or visionary, but if you can't communicate it to the people and they get frustrated or disappointed or stressed out and they burn out and so on. That's
I mean, one of the things I think a lot, I spend a lot of time at the moment is, of course, with the size we are now. I mean, we're not definitely not a massive company, but we are big enough so that you cannot spend individual meetings with everybody, of course, and you have to have sort of lots of other managers that do all this seeing and learning and teaching and all this. And I think that's sort of what I spend a lot of time thinking about. How do you create structures and values and things which can enable you to scale this and to and that's not I don't think I have have an answer there yet, but I have perhaps some tips on the way.
What kind of tips do you have?
Well, I think this whole talk about values is important. That it is important to have values and to talk about them and to sort of instill them and to try and. I mean, our theory is that if we have some clear values and strategies, that we know if we follow them, we know that we will end up a successful company. Then you can spend a lot of time talking about them and talking about the sort of and trying to sort of get people to understand them and sort of build a culture around it. Then that does, I think that doesn't always work, but I think it does kind of push things in the right direction in a general way and give people the ability to sort of act and do things on their own rather than being sort of pointed in one direction. So I think that's important. I think, especially for a company like us with people and I think it does work actually. It's not. I mean, there's a lot of talk about these things, values, and all these things these days, and I think it does work actually. And you have to do it. You have to kind of work with it continuously. It's not something you can sort of do once and then forget about. You have to sort of make sure it's sort of instilled in the culture, and that's a kind of continuous job, I think.
Yeah, that's the tricky part, and that's what makes this discussion about values a bit devalued, so to say.
Yeah, it's always easy to say, and I'm always a lot more interested. Well, how do you do? What things do you do? What actions do you take to make this happen? And I mean, for us, for example, it's definitely we have. I mean, just the fact that I have a proper one-on-one, not necessarily one-on-one, but it could be one with three. Like an intro meeting with everybody. We try and make sure that the values are instilled in all the goals, and we talk about that a lot, and we sort of try and build that culture. And I think that, and also we quite regularly, or sort of the 2 years, we do sort of look at our values and work with them and talk about them and then they sometimes change, or they do change a little bit. But it's sort of I don't know how long that will work, but I think it works for definitely work for a few more years, I think.
I like the example of one of my guests, Hjalmar Gislason. He's the founder here in Iceland, and their company is smaller now than Anne's, and it's younger. It's 2 years old and around 20 people. And he said, like, we have 5 principles, and they are printed out and they are hanging on the wall in the office so that everyone sees them from their offices. And we kind of like use those as the checkpoints for everything we do. So we're asking ourselves when we need to take a decision and we have like 2 different solutions or 2 different functions to implement and so on. And we ask, okay, are we proud of what we do if we take this decision or that? And then just go through those 5 value statements or whatever you call them. And they are the barometer.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. I do think that works. And and you have to, yeah, I agree with that. I think, I mean, also it's interesting when, I mean, we've had over the years, I mean, I'm thinking from the very beginning, we've had different strategies and ideas. I think when you start a company, the problem is it's easy to sort of sit down and think about strategies or values that you think would work, but it's, we definitely had strategies that's at the beginning and also values that we thought this is probably good, but they didn't lead to a successful company. You know what I mean? It sort of, and I think one of the things that has made us more successful over the last maybe 5 or 6 years, when we really kind of found a model that started to grow now properly and have given us some proper growth, and also profitable growth. It's that I think we feel confident that our values and our strategies, in our particular case, they will lead to growth, profit, and of course you can't always guarantee that, but that's an interesting, I think, an interesting point, that you have to sort of find things which work for you. It's very difficult to sort of theorize about what you should have, or what values you should have, or what sort of strategies in general work.
It's very interesting, and I would love to actually tap it or dig deeper into this. How did that transition look like for you, and what kind of values, for example, you had before those 5-6 years ago that didn't really work, and how did you fine tune to actually find that value set that you believe in and that makes you passionate and actually makes you more successful?
Yeah. So the values, actually, they were very much. I mean, it's different. It was difficult to know what's an egg and a hen and egg here, but we've had. I think we had our first, and we definitely had like an exercise in the whole company, and we had our first sort of created our first values. I mean, in classical way, you do sort of storyboard. I mean, you do sketches and things, and you talk about it, and then you try and kind of formulate the wording, and quite often it's not the actual wording isn't really. It's not that important what they actually say, if you see what I mean. It's more of a question that it's what people think they mean or feel that they mean. So it's really the exercise that is the important part, and then just kind of small versions of that exercise going forward. So that's how we started, and that was, I think we probably were around 20 people. Then we realized that was sort of important, or that it was worth doing. And it was definitely not my idea. It was some one of my clever colleagues that realized that we should probably do this, CJ, and it's important. And I think at the time I didn't realize what impact it was going to have. I think it might be an after construction, but I think that's the way it happened.
Exactly. Sometimes, or most often than not, it's actually easier to connect those dots.
Yeah.
From the past, right?
But it's definitely worth doing, and I mean, for example, another example, just one of those things which I think is important. If you, maybe that's a Swedish context, but I think sometimes in Sweden we're a little bit sort of afraid of talking about profit and growth, and why that's important, and you kind of have sort of higher values. And I think for us, it has been important to talk about why is it important to be profitable, and how can you contribute to profit, and why is that important, and why should we grow, and all these things. Because before, I mean, growing is problematic in the sense that it's complicated, and it creates problems, and it's frustrating, and things happen you can't really plan things, and all these things tend to go wrong. So growth will just in the office is too small, and then we have this sort of creates problems for our daily lives. So growth is a complicated thing, and it's you have to talk about why you think growth is important. Why is growth important for you, and why is profit important, and why is it important that we're profitable all the time, and those things. I think that's something we didn't do early on. I think we were afraid to talk about it, I think, perhaps.
That's a very, very good point to bring up, I think, and discuss, Carl-Johan, because I think it's a problem for many entrepreneurs when they start. Quite often, you don't start to be rich, right? Or well, you start because you see some gap in the market. You have some pain yourself as a customer, and you don't see any solution. So you're like, okay, if no one can offer that to me, then I go and create it myself. So you are passionate, you are purpose-driven, and then the money kind of gets. Because it feels conflicting for many people, because they're like, okay, I want to solve this problem. I'm not here for the money, but it doesn't have to be either or.
No, no, and it quite often has to be both. I mean, and if you don't make the money, you're not going to have an impact. And I mean, and that's all. I think it was a very, I mean, a really important thing. It's profitable companies that grow. They make a lot of impact, a lot more impact than those who don't. So I think that's a really
and it's important to surround yourself with the people who actually are modeling that. For myself, I'm in a business accelerator, and the deciding factor for me to invest in that one was the business model with the heart, the combination of the coach who is running that. So it's a very successful, it's the biggest growing coaching company in, at least in the North America. When I joined in the end of May 2020, there were around 30 employees. Now they're around 50 in less than a year.
Mm.
They keep growing, and the revenues, they are in 15 million per year or so in dollars. And she's very openly, Kelly's very openly talking about the profits and the growth of the company. But at the same time, she has a foundation, the nonprofit, with which they have a model one-to-one. So each client, money that comes in, there is a portion of that goes into the foundation, and then they team up with the causes or the funds and foundations that support the causes. For this year, they're talking about mental health, and the foundation is supporting the organizations that are working with mental health. So for me, it was amazing to see, and I want to be around people like her. And of course, she's attracting people who are like, who value that, who are purpose driven, but they see that they need the money, because the more money you get, the more you can actually make an impact in the world with this money.
Definitely, I agree with that. Yeah.
So important to see that. And as I said, just look for people, look for the networks, look for the masterminds, whatever it is, where you can find the people who are modeling and living by the principles that you want to internalize yourself. Borrow their beliefs, borrow their confidence in that it will work until you really have it within yourself. I think it's very important for us entrepreneurs.
No, I agree with that. I mean, also, I just sort of talking about sort of entrepreneurship, and that's one of those things that I think is important, inspiring young people to start companies. And sometimes I think I do sometimes see is that there's quite often this sort of I mean, sort of aim big, and you have to have an idea which is fantastic and has to be sort of massive. It has a scale. I think of course there's a trend over the last years that you have to have sort of tech companies that can be really big. And for us, of course, and for us being big company, and I mean, this way we perhaps will, we perhaps would have a turnaround, maybe 65, 75 million kroner, something like that. I mean, for us, this was a crazy prospect, of course, 10, 15 years ago. But I mean, we're still small, of course, compared to lots of others, and perhaps others would say it was a failure. So I think it's important to say that most companies don't have to be IKEA or H&M or Spotify or Facebook. Of course, not most companies don't have to be that. And it's okay to be a smaller success and do it over a little bit of time. And for us, sort of succeeding with maybe 20, 25%, sometimes even 30% growth every year, I mean, and being able to do that in a profitable way, that's of course an amazing success for us. And so I think it's important to sort of also perhaps see that a lot of those, a lot of smaller companies become very, very successful in the long term. They don't necessarily have to be sort of massive ideas or global, all these things. And it's
I think here it's important to know yourself. Why are you doing this, and what would it mean to be the CEO of Spotify or the next Spotify?
Yeah, but I mean, I think also a lot of, especially with the VC capital and these things, I think there is a trend. I've seen it lots of times, and I think almost sometimes companies are sometimes almost on the verge of being ruined by having too much money. If you see what I mean, it's sort of, and you realize that perhaps the venture capitalist and the entrepreneur, I mean, they're sort of what's good for the VC isn't necessarily good for the entrepreneur, in the sense that VC has to have 20 bets and you have one or two that has to be massively good, which means that but they all have to be you have the possibility to be massively good, but you probably ruin a few of them on the way by or at least you ruin it for the entrepreneur, in the sense that the entrepreneur gets pushed out or loses ownership if it just does reasonably well. If it taken a little bit longer and I'm just saying this because I think this is the moment there's a trend where everything has to be massively valued, and you have to sort of aim for really massive revenue and all these things. And I'm sure I would probably be there as well if I could. It
depends on the personality and
maybe
your way of working and your preferences and so on. VCs are great sometimes because or if you choose wisely, you get a lot of value as well, not only the money they bring,
Oh, yeah,
and the
perhaps,
expertise.
perhaps. I, perhaps.
Oh,
yeah, perhaps, yeah. As an entrepreneur, the
that's a
VC
problem
always tend
with
to be the
some.
enemy, don't they? They're
Sorry?
sort of as an entrepreneur, the VC tends to be the enemy. That's sort of what that.
All right. Yeah, I've never been in those shoes. Like I'm for organic growth. I think for me personally, it's more about I never tend to sell my company. I want that to be my life work. And then it's a bit difficult to take in the external investment because they get it back when you sell. Okay, there are different models, of
Yeah,
course.
of course, and it's different. I mean, I don't. I'm not saying all VCs are bad. No, definitely not. But but it's definitely a different kind of entrepreneurship. I mean, I think it's like having a bot. I mean, it's like if a lot of people I think become entrepreneurs because they or decide to have their own companies because they want to make their own decisions, perhaps, or perhaps own their own. I mean, decide things for themselves.
Mm.
Of course, that's never completely true because you're always you're always sort of delivering to somebody. You have customers and all these things, of course. So you can't. I mean, that's not. But of course, when you have an owner, that's a different situation. He or she is calling more of the shots than you are yourself. So
Yeah, it's important to know yourself, as I said a bit earlier, that and question your own decisions and your own dreams. Where does it come from? Would that feed my ego, for example? And sometimes it's an uncomfortable question to ask yourself, but ask about that. Or will it actually move me to my goals, my ultimate why, and so on. So it's important to have space for yourself to reflect on those things. And I think that's another thing that is difficult for many entrepreneurs, that they just run and run. There's so much to do. There's always more work than the hours in the day. And you just get eaten up and you don't have the space to sit down and reflect, okay, what is important for me? How am I living? Do I sacrifice something that was not okay for me to sacrifice when I was starting this company? So just kind of getting the perspective, stepping out of this wheel for a moment and seeing, okay, am I happy being at that wheel? Because you can be, but you need to be aware of that before it's too late.
I agree with that. I try actually. I do it. Maybe it's a little bit silly, but I try and do every year. I have like a meeting with myself. It's in the calendar. And I sit down and I sort of decide what are my goals for the coming year, what's important, and I do it on a personal level, but also on a company level. I sort of try and I think to a certain extent, I try and sort of the relationships that are important to me. How my wife would be very frustrated if I'm saying this on the podcast, but sort of, I mean, I try and sit down and say, okay, what are the goals? How do I hope that our life is going to be together? What are my goals for the children? And then I try and sort of structure that. And then I in theory, I don't do it. I'm not as good as it every week, but I try and look at them every week
Mm-hmm.
and remind myself if I'm working towards the long-term goals.
That's great. And that's actually something I have recommended to some of my clients, that to take this personal conference. I call it a personal conference. Quite a lot of companies go on those conference events where you kind of team building and you maybe exchange some knowledge and just having some fun. I'm saying you can do the same with yourself. Take one day, go to a hotel that has a conference room, rent that conference room for yourself, do the brainstorming on there, write it down, then finalize your goals somehow for the coming period, whatever it's a quarter or a year, as you said, or 5-year period, and then enjoy the hotel. Like have a good dinner with yourself, do some activities around, have a good sleep. Just that's so important because we can change companies, right? Whether we're founders or we're employees and so on, but we never change ourselves. We always need to live with ourselves, and it's important to know ourselves and to understand where are we going, and to always keep reminding ourselves about those goals of ours, the dreams of ours, and also the values.
I agree with that. I mean, for me, I don't actually do that, but I do. We do. Me and Hugo, we own the guy in the company with. We've been working together now for, like I said, almost 20 years. And we do actually try and quite regularly, in the sense maybe 3 or 4 times a year, we try and spend perhaps half a day together and just take a long walk or we sort of goes to the gym, and then we sort of do talk about what we what's important for us and what's important for him, and I think that's been important over the years to be able to be aligned. And I also, to some extent, realization that the big risks for small companies like ours is that the owners start fighting. So I think we have a certain also responsibility to the rest of the company that to make sure that we are to a certain extent aligned. And I mean, of course, it's important to have disagreements as well, but and also, of course, life changes. I mean, you have different goals and different things that are important in different times in your life.
But I think what you're doing is very important, to have those check-in points, right? So that you don't go too far just because you have the commitment, but for one of you, the situation has changed. And okay.
No, that's true. I agree with that. Yeah.
That it doesn't go for a couple of years and then you just explode, or you create a toxic environment for the whole company because you're not talking through those things. You don't have the forum for that to talk it through together with Hugo. So it's important to have those check-in points and have this habit of discussing those things.
Yeah, I agree with that. Yeah.
Yeah, that's great. So you're trying to grow now, right? And this year has been tough. What have been your challenges for that and learnings from that so far?
Perhaps I should say something about what we do. We're a sourcing and recruitment company for the tech sector. So our business model is we build recruitment departments or recruitment functions for growing tech companies, and that can be your classical tech company with a tech department, but also more and more actually it's also everybody else, in the sense that everybody's becoming a tech company, and that's and our purpose or our mission is to try and solve the resource problem in the tech sector by sort of helping them build great tech departments, one step at a time, and also actually trying to create really good talent acquisition professionals, i.e. people that work with us, because we think that's something that's going to be really needed when the industry grows. And I think, as everybody knows, I mean, the fact that we're here and everything else, I mean, the sort of the massive change in the world economy over the last 10 years, call it digitalization or techification, or all these things that happen around us, they've of course created a massive need for software developers in general, but also lots of roles and people around that, and that and we've sort of found a model to be able to solve that problem for a lot of companies, and it involves a lot of things. It involves, recruitment and sourcing and employer branding, all these things. So it's sort of a whole sort of range of services. And that was, full speed ahead until sort of March last year, a little bit earlier perhaps. And we also have big companies, big customers for us, so the car industry and also the big sort of tech consultant industries. And as with a lot of other places, basically overnight, everything stopped because of COVID. I think it was almost exactly a year ago, actually, that we started realizing things were happening, or at least they were going south. First of all, it was a problem, was all the sort of work from home thing, and we thought that was going to be the problem. But then really quickly, customers started calling and saying, sorry, we don't know what's going to happen. We don't know, we have to stop everything. And I think it was a period of maybe 2 or 3 weeks. Our projection of revenue, comparison between March and June, went down with 75%. So our projection was that we were going to have 25% of our revenue in June that we had in March, and that had been on quite a steep growth from before then. So that was that's what happened. And looking back, I feel very. I remember, and I think I'm very thankful actually, talking about important relationships. I'm involved in an entrepreneurial group called Founders Alliance, and I was actually a friend there he was very early on. He said, listen, CJ, this is going to be the biggest crisis in 100 years. You have to really react early, and this is what I think. And he sort of very kindly shared his view on the situation. I think, and that made me realize quite early that we were really something tough was going to happen. So we were very early about communicating with our employees. Listen, this is what we think. We don't know what's going to happen, but we think it's going to be one of the toughest economic crises in 100 years. And so what happened was it was really, and with a company of our size, with a sort of consultant company that grows like that, of course the big cost is people. So and at a certain point, it was, if even if everybody started working or sort of finished, got let off tomorrow, if that curve continued, it wouldn't have mattered what we did. We might have gone bust anyway. That actually didn't happen. Wasn't quite as bad as we thought. Things got pushed a little bit forward, and then for us, by sort of end of June, perhaps, we started seeing things that we weren't. I think we almost kind of touched 25% in June, but we did, see that things started turning around and started to not immediately. And in September, anybody who had been laid off was welcome back, and we also started seeing actually that people were getting new jobs in other places, and that was sort of a sign, I think, that our industry was doing quite well. And then from sort of mid-September, perhaps even mid-November, we've had the most unbelievable return, actually. And I think the reason for that is that the whole, if you look at from a kind of a macro perspective, the answer to the pandemic for a lot of companies is not less digitalization; it's more digitalization. It's you haven't seen that speech I had. I think that was my conclusion. It's not less tech; it's more tech. It's not sort of less innovation; it's more innovation. And I think also actually what is another interesting factor is that a lot of the sort of global problems we have, and perhaps climate change is one of them. The answer to that, I think, for a lot of people, it is not less innovation, it's more tech, it's more innovation, it's more digitalization. It can also, so all these things conspire together to drive the need for good software development, and that happened a lot faster than we. The rebound was a lot quicker than we expected, and for us that meant that there was also a lot of other people in our industry that weren't doing that well, and we could very luckily also have been able to hire a lot of new employees that are really new colleagues that have skilled and experienced and good in many ways. So it's been, I think, been very, very, very lucky, and it's been but it's been very I told you we experienced 2008, and that was we were a lot smaller then, but that was also dramatic. But at that time, we said, "Oh, it was so dramatic because we experienced a 30% loss in revenue over 6 months or something like that." That was sort of how it was unbelievably dramatic, and and now it was sort of a 75% in 2 months. So it was dramatic in a way that I don't think. I think people have very rightly compared it to economically to the shocks of war, and I think that was also. And I think if you talk about learnings, I think one of the important learnings just in general is that you do have to be prepared for these really. These things can happen, and I think somebody told me if you compare different countries, if you look at companies in Israel, for example, they're a lot more used to sort of having this sort of extreme risk handling. Just for example, if you have a hotel on the coast in Israel, you have to be prepared for war, because that's just one of the things that generally sometimes happen in the Middle East, and then revenue goes to zero. So I think we're not used to those really massive risks in Sweden, and that's a learning.
Yeah. So how do you prepare for that? Because economy is cyclical, right? And then the scientists are talking about, okay, the economic winter comes at least once a decade, and of course it can be different with the impact of it, but it does come. So how do you prepare now as the company, as ants, for the next crisis that will inevitably come?
I think one of the things is to always be profitable. I think if we hadn't worked on we could have definitely had a strategy year before per COVID. We should have said, let's push a little bit harder, let's grow a little bit more. Don't worry about profit at the moment. That will solve itself. It's important to be more, and I think we could have been. If we had done that, we wouldn't have survived. I don't think if we hadn't had a profit, a good profit there. And it was a little bit lucky because we sort of the end of the year in 2019, 2019, we had invested in some big projects and we weren't actually profitable. And there was, so if it had happened around New Year, I think it would have been tougher than it happened a little bit later. But so I think that is important to always sort of make sure you, of course, that goes for service companies, because it's also good to be profitable, because it kind of shows you're doing things right and you make sure the customers are happy, and all these things are really, really important. But so that's one thing, I think, always trying to be profitable, or at least have a big margin. And that's easy to say, because of course we didn't have a big margin when we started, and it's sort of a stupid advice because of course I mean, that's, yes, of course I'd like to have a big margin, but I don't have any margins. So I mean, that's all.
But I think it's a good point that you're saying, because sometimes you want to kind of bootstrap once you're doing well to have the bigger growth. And those are the learnings that you're talking about. It's not about being totally ignorant of, like, okay, not everyone is profitable from day one.
Yeah.
So
and I realize there are models that, but I mean, it's really important to know. It's sort of important to know whether you're moving towards a profit, or that your base service is profitable, and all these things. And I think a lot of, and I'm no expert in these things, but I do see a lot of examples, in the tech environment where they just never become profitable, and and it's always more growth, and then. And when you do these calculations and budget things, you realize you can almost show anything, but if you can't, in the end, show that you're profitable on the sort of last line, it's not going to be. So that, I think that's important. I think also it's important to when things do happen, or you see big changes in your surroundings, it's important to talk through what you're going to do, be prepared to that, and sort of have a plan for it. So if this happens, let's talk about this. What should we do? And that can sometimes be difficult, because also by talking about things, and of course you can't do that with everybody all the time, because just by talking about crazy things that can happen, you do create worry and all these things. And but at least in perhaps a smaller group, talk through, what are we going to do if this and this happens? How do we handle that? And at least have a sort of so that you don't become completely unprepared. And I have another background in I spent a lot of time sailing and at sea, and one of the things you talk about that when you prepare for emergencies or catastrophes, you talk about how to sort of, you have to practice this. And of course, the best thing is to practice leaving the ship when it's sinking. But also, it does make a big difference talking about it and talking to each other. How do we do it? And thinking through, what will I do mentally if this happens? And there's lots of research being done on this, that if you've done that, you do react a lot better when things actually happen, because you can't really quite often it happens quickly. You don't have that much time to do things, and the quicker you react, the quicker you do things, I think the better you do.
Yeah, you create new wiring in your brain. And then that's what
Yeah.
I talk about with my clients, about the journaling that they have to do every evening. And one of the questions after a while that we add is, what did I do less well today? And what is my learning?
Oh, that's a really good one. Yeah.
And that's really important. It comes from Mia Turnblom. For me, I know that she didn't invent it, but Swedish people would know her, and she was also on my podcast as a guest. And it's very important. It's your way of not beating yourself up, but instead going to the situation that you're not happy about and creating an alternative scenarios that your brain knows that there is an alternative. And the next
so take that again. Remember, because I try to do that. Well, how do you do it? How do you do that? What do you do every day?
You just have a journal and a pen.
Yeah.
And answer 4 questions. So you start in the beginning. I usually start with 3 questions. What did I do well today? Or what am I proud of? What am I grateful for? And what do I need help with? And we don't start with this, what did I do less well today? And what is my learning? Because the people I work with are high performers. They are like super good already, but they keep beating themselves up. There is always something that is not enough. Talking about the self-esteem. And we need to build that up first. So I usually say that we need to really strengthen the cheerleading team within you, the inner cheerleader, before we work with the inner critic. So once the inner cheerleader is strong enough, then we add this, okay, what did I do less well today, and what is my learning? And I combine it with the values of mine. So talking about the values, I have 3 words that are my value words. And I write them. I started a couple of weeks ago with that. I usually did it mentally, like thinking about my words and then writing down things that in relation to those words, but now I'm actually explicitly writing my words down. So my journal entry starts with date. Next to the date, my 3 value words. Then I did less well, column, and then I say the value word. So an area in which I did not behave or act as the person I want to be ultimately. And then I write about the situation. It doesn't have to be journal. You can be like writing 2 words as long as you know what it is about.
What is by?
Yeah. And the learning, I don't write learning column. I just put it like a period and then the new sentence is about what my action is for the next time. So it is about the action there.
That's
and then
good.
and then I did well. And then again, the value word, and then what I did well to show that I live as this person I want to be.
I'm writing down.
Yeah, that's good.
That's a good tip.
And I think it's important. And as you said, it's important to talk those things, but I want to emphasize that you can do this work yourself as well. Because not always we can talk to someone. Like we not always have access to someone who could be or create the space for us to talk those things through. So it's important to get the habit of doing that yourself and having the tools to do it yourself. As I said, it's about creating alternative solutions so that your brain knows like, oh, I can actually choose how to react now, next time it happens, or when it does happen in the reality. And then if you repeatedly like write about this alternative scenario, that wiring gets stronger than the pattern that you're not happy about. And that's the beauty of it. That's the power of rewiring our brain. Because then this alternative scenario reaction kicks in quicker next time it happens. Or not next time, but after a couple of times it happened and you journaled about it. And that's the power of journaling as well, that you're really able to prepare yourself for the next times.
Yeah, that's good. That's a good tip, actually. I think I might try it.
Great. And again, you can do it with your leadership team, for example. That's the same mechanism. It's just instead of writing, you having a meeting and talking about those things. All right, I would like to wrap up. Just very mindful of the time, even though.
Yeah, that's fine. I have to 12:30. That's fine, sir. So as long as we finish by
I'm just thinking
12:30.
about the listeners as well. People getting scared when they see over 1 hour episodes.
Yeah, I thought that as well. But I was very, very keen on keeping it short when we started our podcast, and then we just started doing longer ones, and people listen even more. So, so
it's just about doing what you feel gives most value.
Probably, yeah.
People will be attracted by that, right?
Have you felt that did you get what you wanted? Has it been a good talk?
I'm enjoying it, and I'm still having the conversation actually, because I still have my finishing questions for you.
Go ahead then. Yeah.
As I said, for me, it's difficult to wrap up because just as last time when we talked, the first time when we talked in real time, I could have gone for hours with you because we have so many intersections of our questions and interests. But yeah, let's wrap up and just continue some other time.
Yeah, and I feel that I've been quite unstructured in that sense. So you forgive me for being so.
No.
I always have to spread.
This is the beauty of this podcast. I'm never like scripting anything, and it's a conversation, right? And I never know where we will end up, and that's the beauty of it, because we get the best of the moment now. And sometimes I get this feedback like, oh, I really wanted, like from the listeners, I really wanted you to dig deeper into this topic and so on. And I'm really helpful for that feedback because it knows, or it gives me the understanding of what people want more of so that I can actually include it in the conversation. But it's difficult to cover everything in the good depth.
Good point.
That's why we have in those weekend episodes every week, and there is a never-ending topic pool for every episode. So, Carl-Johan, what would be your 3 pieces of advice for our genius leaders listening or tuning
in? Well, that's I perhaps not to take advice from people like me, but if you're insistent on doing that, I think as a leader, I think the first thing would be to really work on your interest for other people. And I think also that goes for when you pick out leaders or try and choose leaders around you or to your company. I think really focus on that part, the people who are interested in other people and truly interested and I think also try and work on that ability yourself to interest yourself in how other people feel and how and do things, because if you do that, it also makes life more interesting, I think, and it makes your job a lot more fun. And also I do think it makes you better as a leader, that sort of keep being interested and what's it, it's the English word for nyfiken, it's sort of curious, exactly, yeah. Stay curious. That's the first piece of advice, I think. I think the second one would perhaps also be, I think the one we started with, that to really try and focus on how can you kind of grow together with other people and help them to grow, but also how can they help you to grow. I think perhaps those two are the best. And perhaps the third one, I think, maybe enjoy the ride. You've got to have some fun along the way, perhaps, as well. I think that's also a good piece of life advice, perhaps. And I think it also it especially goes for entrepreneurship. I think I think we've always been, I think entrepreneurs quite often, or leaders quite often, they do have a tendency to sort of always worry. And I think that's a really, I think that is a good thing in a sense, because if you don't have that, you don't mitigate the risks and don't handle things before. And so I think it's a good thing but you also do have to sometimes, it also is good to realize that you're on a fun ride, and it's sort of, it's a great thing to own a company and to lead other people. It's a really a privilege, and you have to remember that sometimes, and also try and enjoy it. I think that makes life a lot more fun. And I always remember I had an uncle, actually, which I has inspired me a lot, and he's also a small owner in ants at one point, and he always told me, when we, all those tough years at the beginning, he said, you're going to look back and it's going to be the best part, and I think he was right. It always is fun, and you have to remember that as well.
You're tapping into so many things now, so I'll just continue for a couple more minutes. Like everyone listening to the podcast knows that like it has the roller coaster on the cover art of it, and that's how I see the leadership role. It's a roller coaster ride. And what you're talking here about, work on your interest in other people, that's this comparison for me. Like, not everyone likes roller coasters, and not everyone would like to be a leader. So that's interest in the other people is this kind of definition of, should you get on that ride or not? But then if you do, how can you actually enjoy it more? And
I mean, I think you can lead in other ways as well, but I think, but if you can, that does help, I think.
I think it's one of the crucial things. If you're not interested in the other people, it's very difficult to lead them in a healthy way, healthy for you and healthy for the others. So that's one of the crucial things. And if you by no chance are interested in the others, then maybe you should find some other kind of role.
Yeah, that's probably true.
All right. One practical tip of or piece of advice that our genius leaders can implement already today after listening.
One practical piece. Well, I think, I mean, that what you talked about there, the sort of definitely making kind of a personal plan and trying to remind yourself of that's one that has helped me a lot. For me, it was also connected with a little bit of time management, in the sense that I think one of the I mean, things about being an entrepreneurial leader is that you always have a lot to do, and that's, you're always going to have too much to do in this sense. But if you can have this plan where you do think about what's important and you try and kind of work towards these things and get things done, and then that does help. And for me, at least, it has helped from a time management point of view, that you know that there are some things you're just not going to be able to do, but at least the things you're doing are in some sense going towards the goals that you've decided that that you are the right thing. That does help with stress and all these things that I think everybody experiences that has this kind of a job. So for me, that's it was quite a practical kind of time management perspective of, having a long-term plan, sitting down and spending some time planning your day and planning a week, and in the best of days, making sure that at least you're working towards your other goals. Because if you don't plan, it just becomes more and more stressful, and you're sort of not taking decisions about what you want to do. The environment is taking decisions for you,
Yeah.
and
You
that at
couldn't
least
own your
helped me.
calendar, the others own your calendar.
Yeah, exactly. You have to sort of take hold of it, and sometimes you can't do that because sometimes things just happen, and you have to just handle it. But if you do that a little bit every day, or at least every week, then it does push you in the right direction, and I think that's helped me a lot actually, and it has handled it. I think you also have to realize, I mean, the same sort of thing that you have to realize that building a company, quite often it does take quite a lot of time, in the sense that it takes many years, and quite often even more. And success doesn't come immediately, so you have to be able to make sure that you have the ability, and quite often that's a physical, and to stay, you have to stay fit and mentally well, and it has to be the long-term race. It has to, it's not a sprint, it's almost always a marathon. Sometimes you can have sort of peaks where you just, I mean, like just last year, of course, during those months you've got to work. You don't have a choice, but you can't work like that every day, because then you won't be able to complete the marathon, or complete the massive marathon. And that's really, really important to have a long-term perspective on and that's different for different people, but for me at least, that was a big thing, to start having a more structured day and a plan. And
That's very important. And that's the thing. My business coach, who I mentioned, Kelly, she's saying that she's wiping off her calendar every quarter and starts anew, because of the growth, because of the development of the company. The needs are changing, and it has to be reflected. And she's saying, like, I live by my calendar. Everything is in there. There are no to-dos. I don't use any productivity apps. Everything has to go on my calendar. Because if I use, like, I just discussed it with one of my clients this morning, that I said, we use a lot of different productivity tools, and we use each of them as if we would only use that tool.
Yeah, and actually, when talking about to-do lists, because before a few years ago, I was doing it all electronically. I said, "Oh, I have all my to-do lists," and what happens then is you have massive to-do lists that they go on forever. So I've actually gone back to doing like every day, doing just a paper to-do list. And okay, this is what's important today. And of course, I do have some place I just put long-term projects, but I have a very practical, and just do what are the sort of 5 to 10 things I should do today, and then it's sort of a mental exercise, and then you can kind of throw that away, start anew, and so it's quite a good. For me, that works quite well. And then also things that don't come up again, they're probably not important.
Yeah, I actually have it as part of my daily journaling in the evening, that I write focus for tomorrow, and then it's. I tried to have it at 3 points, but then I realized, okay, sometimes it's 7 things that have to be there, so that I like focus on those, and I don't take anything else before those 7 are ticked off. So it's part of my evening thing. I look at my calendar for tomorrow, and then I write down the things that I need.
I mean, it's also a mathematical thing. I mean, if you think about 10 projects, and just ordering 10 projects, it's just there's a massive combination of ways how to order them. So it's really difficult to decide what's most important. So it's something, if you can, I think it's also from a software point of view, where if you have massive to-do lists, somebody told me, never have a to-do list more than 10 points. Everything else just goes in a jumble. And if it comes back, it's important. If it doesn't come back, probably not important.
Yeah, Warren Buffett is talking about that with the dreams as well, and the goals, like list 25 of your biggest dreams. And then he said, like, cross 3 of them that are most important.
Yeah.
And then throw away the rest. And he's saying, like, this is the danger, that we have 25 dreams and we try to work on all of them.
Yeah. You have to choose. That's life. You have to choose. And yeah. I have to go now, but I read a funny story but I read an article recently about when are you most happy in life? And there's lots of research on this, and happiness research, and they have all these trends, and apparently, a lot of the research points towards that you're most happy around 16.
Okay.
And then it's sort of like it's sort of like a slope that goes down, and then it kind of bottoms out around 48, and then it starts rising again. And the reason for this apparently is that at 16 you start making choices in life where all opportunities aren't there. You kind of choose I suppose even at 16 you're going to be a professional footballer, but all these things you sort of remove things, and then And then at 48, you realize you start accepting things that, okay, I'm never going to do this. I'm gonna do this. And so it's just a funny story about
and you
making choices.
stop caring about what other people think. And
yeah, maybe that's. I'm sure there's lots of reasons, but it's still quite a sort of. And so I think that does show that it's always a little bit uncomfortable choosing things that you don't want to do rather than choosing things that you do. But I think it's you trick yourself, because by not choosing anything, or not by not removing things, it's like not choosing anything. So that's also a piece of advice, perhaps.
It's a tricky puzzle of life.
Thank you very much, Anna. I'm sorry, I have a hard stop actually now. I've been a little bit late. So thank you. It was really fun talking to you, and I really enjoyed this. It's always fun to talk about oneself. So it's.
I'm pretty sure a lot of people have found a lot of value in your conversation about yourself.
Yeah, and anybody in the podcast and listening to this, please reach out. Happy to share whatever we do, and just get in touch. And I'm active on LinkedIn. It's probably the best way to reach me. And
we'll put the links in the show notes that everyone can easily reach out to you.
Yeah. Good luck, Anna.